One of the first things you usually do in the assessment process is gain information about the client's drug use history. Now, a lot of times the agencies that you'll be working for will already have pre-formatted, preset questions that you'll just kind of go through in a checklist fashion with your clients. So you won't necessarily have to remember to ask all these different, spheres of information. Instead, it'll be all there in your paperwork, or if you're using a computerized system in the computer, and you just kind of go through it like a checklist. But to kind of assess why we're asking these questions and explain the rationale for them, let's talk a little bit about the types of information that we want to try to gain from a client in the assessment process regarding their drug use. So we want to know the amount being used. So again, we encourage clients to estimate how much are they currently using, how much were they using a year ago, 2 years ago, when did they first start off using, and at how much. And this is important to know because this can tell us a little bit about tolerance. And we'll talk about tolerance in the next lecture when we talk about the DSM-5 criteria. But if we see that over the course of a couple years, someone has gone from 2 beers a day to 7 or 8 beers a day, that lets us know that there's a significant increase in their usage. The amount used can also tell us potentially, along with date of last use, whether someone is at risk of withdrawal potential. So for example, if someone tells us that on average they drink about 10 beers a day, and we ask them, well, when was the last time you drank alcohol? And they say, oh, about a day ago. We might want to get really concerned for their physical well-being, their medical well-being, because that person could be at risk of withdrawal and could potentially, have really severe physical reactions during that process. So knowing the amount that someone used and when they last used is very important for a couple of reasons. We also want to know the social context of when people use. So do you drink alone? Do you get high with friends? When and where do you use? This will be important because when we start to develop a treatment plan, we'll need to assess how are we going to address that social context. So if you always get high when you're with your friends, can you really hang around with those friends anymore and not get high and not drink, right? We start looking at relapse triggers and how to deal with them. And that'll come in more with the treatment planning process. We also want to know the age of first use. The age of first use. One of the things that we know is that individuals who start using and abusing drugs and alcohol at earlier ages have much harder times getting clean and sober in the long term. So if someone started abusing alcohol at the age of 13, the amount of time and energy and work that they're going to need to get sober on a long-term basis is a lot different than someone that started drinking at 18 and now they're both, 30, let's say. The age of first use is a great predictor of long-term recovery chances and also kind of sliding into other forms of addiction. So for example, there's some research out there that indicates that the neurological pathways in the brain are laid relatively early in life. There's a saying out there, neurons that wire together, fire together. So we know for young people aged 10 to 12 years of age who start abusing prescription opiates, so stereotypical going into your grandmother's cabinet and taking a Percocet or whatever the case may be, and their brains, their neuronal pathways are exposed to that opiate between the ages of 10 and 12 years of age, those individuals are 18 times more likely to use heroin later in life. And if they start between the age of 13 and 15, they're 15 times more likely to use heroin later in life. So that age of first use can really tell us a lot about kind of what we're up against, neurologically speaking. Some other questions we want to ask in the assessment process are why people use the drugs that they do. Now, this might sound like a weird question to ask someone. They're coming to you to get clean and sober, and we ask them basically, what do you like about getting high? It would seem like, well, why would you want them to talk about the good things associated with it? But there's a very logical and sound reason why we want to ask that question. We are asking that individual to give up that drug or alcohol, right? They are using drugs and alcohol for a reason. They get something out of it. And if we're taking it away from them and we can't replace that feeling, that benefit, with something else that's healthier, that's going to make them much more likely later on to go back to using. So say, for example, someone says, well, I drink alcohol because I just get so anxious and it helps me calm down. I have a couple glasses of wine and I feel good. Well, if we're asking you to no longer drink alcohol, to give up your wine, you're still left with all this anxiety. So what do we need to do in counseling? What do we need to put in our treatment plan? We need to state, develop ways of coping with anxiety. Learning mindfulness or relaxation or exercise or something. If we take the drugs and alcohol away and we don't replace it with something to address the reason why they're using, that's a recipe for long-term failure. We also want to know the client's previous treatment history. We want to hopefully get the client to sign consents of release of information so we can contact those agencies and get that information from them. For good reasons and bad reasons. We want to know from the client, what did you like about your previous treatment placements? What were the good things about working with those counselors and staff? What were the bad things? What worked before? And if it worked before, possibly it can work now. Also, getting that information from previous treatment providers also allows us to do some checking on the information that the client is giving us. Now, in addition to talking about the benefits of usage, what they like about getting high, we obviously want to talk about the consequences of usage too. Because those negatives that go along with drinking and using drugs, those negatives are going to be the thing that spurs motivation to change that behavior. And we'll talk later in the semester, actually at the very end of the semester, about motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a form of counseling that focuses very heavily on the consequences of usage and using those consequences to increase a person's motivation to change behavior.